We were speaking last time of the practical side of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, and after giving the theoretical background of the yogic traditions involved, we came to grips with the practical working out of his philosophy of integral perfection of life. We defined integral as meaning covering all the sides of the human being, and in addition integrating the development on each level and in each part with the progress on other levels and in other parts. This involves not just a linear progress, but a constant turning back to pick up areas that have remained obscure, bring them in line with the general growth. And broadly speaking, we demarcated 4 areas: the physical, the vital, the mental, and the spiritual. The divine consciousness organizes itself as knowledge in the mind, love in the heart, power in the vital, and beauty in the physical. And any discipline that aims at the integral perfection of life has to build these divine values in these 4 spheres of existence. We start where we are, and the focus of most of us being, at any rate in the beginning, primarily on the physical side, we begin translating this wisdom on the physical level of our life. We saw that the first truth to be kept in mind is that there is a divine consciousness pervading all life, and we must learn to be awake to the existence of this consciousness in every form and establish a relation between us and other forms, whether we call them animate or inanimate, on the level of consciousness. And in doing so, our own consciousness becomes awake and articulate. We also labored the point that the aesthetic side of life, building beauty, perceiving beauty, and living in beauty, is the next step. And this principle is to be kept in mind in arrangement of things, our own personal dress, appearance, and if we have children at home, in the education of those children. Right from the beginning, children should be exposed to standards of beauty, elegance on all sides. Side by side with beauty of form, an eye should be kept on rhythm in movement. The one point that I could have made during the discussion on this point is that in Sanskrit tradition, Sanskrit literature in India, we have quite a developed science of aesthetics, rhetorics, poetry, and volumes have been written on the requirements of beauty, requirements of rhythm. For instance, they speak of defects of poetry, and they say how particular sequence of syllables is harsh on the ear, and that poetry is disqualified. Similarly, when you speak of love, tenderness, if the sound of words used to describe is harsh, that is considered to be a defect. The sound, the sense, the sentiment, and the context, they all have to agree. Discussing in that line, the question is asked, what is beauty? And the answer that is most satisfactory and revealing is that which throbs with a newness at every moment, a freshness at every moment. That is beauty. The more you regard it, the more you look at it, the more fresh you feel, and every moment there is an infusion of happiness, fresh happiness. That's the secret of beauty. So beauty is a living concept, a living truth. And Mother speaks of beauty of thought, beauty of speech, beauty of feeling, beauty of activity, beauty of form. At all levels, the divine seeks to express itself in the form of beauty. In the East particularly, it is a strong tradition to speak of God not only as peaceful, not only as pure, not only as powerful, all-knowing, but also as beautiful. Lord Krishna, the divine aspect of bliss, Ananda, is always adored as the beauty par excellence. And wherever one comes across beauty, the mind goes back to the Lord of beauty. But Sri Aurobindo points out that beauty should not be confused with softness. Beauty is there in a smile, but it is also there in the speed of a whirlwind. There is an awesome beauty in the terrible. Another definition of beauty, I do not know whether I mentioned it, is Mother's definition that when all the elements constituting a thing are in harmony, that is beauty. This is very near to her other definition, which I would like you to keep in mind always. It is about perfection. We always think perfection is a summit or an altitude to be attained. One day we will be reaching that summit height, and that is perfection. She says no. She says the maximum optimization in coordinating all the existing elements in a situation is the perfection of the moment. It implies that the perfection of today is not necessarily the perfection of tomorrow. It changes, it moves according to the constituent factors of a situation. The perfection changes. But in all situations, the maximum possible harmonization of all the factors in a situation is the perfection. This puts perfection in everybody's reach. It is not an ideal far off that can never be actualized. And then we spoke of the necessity of paying due attention to the quality of sleep, to the amount of sleep, the necessity of being conscious in sleep, to be able to remember our dreams, and while not making a fetish of food, to always keep in mind that the consciousness that is behind the food that you eat plays a part in the development of our life. The next phase or stage that we took up concerned the region of vitality or life forces, and we discussed the discipline of replacing the desire ego motive of works by consecration and dedicating our energies to the divine. We noted that to offer our works as our labor of love to the Master of Works, to the Lord of our life, is the first step. Giving up of our claims to the fruit of works is the next. Giving up the claim in the choice of work is the third. Replacing the sense of the doer by the sense of being an instrument is the next. The sense of instrument gradually changes into a sense of being a channel through which flows the divine power, and this leads to a gradual identification with the divine. We always have the divine as the real destination of our energies, and in the measure in which we remember and offer, and work becomes impersonal rather than a personal involvement, works do not bind, but they become a means of liberation. It is also to be noted that our energies are intended by nature to be put out in movement, and they shall not be bottled up with a negative approach, but always used consciously. The more we expend our energies with the right attitude, the more nature pours her energies into us. our energies are limited and small, precisely in the measure in which our consciousness is limited and small. If we are always self-centered, selfish, and work only for ourselves, the quantum of energies we get is small. But if we enlarge our sphere of activity, cultivate selflessness and yoke ourselves to some non-personal objective, our field widens and our consciousness and force broaden. The life energy that pours into us is really unlimited. It is restricted only by our capacity to receive it, hold it, and express it. It is an art that we have to develop of progressively expanding the play of conscious energy in our lives. We then step into the third stage, the field of emotions. The field of emotions may be said to range, say, from the abdominal area, from the abdomen to the throat. It is always a kind of a sea of turbid movements. there are good impulses, wrong impulses. I should have said right impulses and wrong impulses. And quite a many of them are mixed, which makes them more dangerous. If a thing is wrong entirely, it is easy to spot it. But if it is mixed with a little good, as often happens in life, things become complicated. The Gita speaks of Daivic qualities, godly qualities, and those that are ungodly. In everyone, they are there mixed up, and it is the business of culture, ethics, morality, to diminish the hold of the wrong and negative movements on us. They seek to promote the more positive and right qualities, right movements in our life. Beyond observing to whatever extent things like the 10 Commandments or scriptural injunctions, just because they have been said without understanding their implications. We are rarely conscious of this situation. We allow ourselves to be driven. We rarely sit and analyze what are the things that are driving us. What makes us happy and what makes us unhappy? And when we pay attention to this side of life, we see that as evolving creatures, beings, all the past lives in us. There is still the legacy of the animal in each one of us. Even as there are faint awakenings of our higher potentialities towards divinity. The human is the meeting ground of the lower and the higher. And there is always in the human a tug of war between the animal impulses and the Godward impulses. As seekers of perfection of life, we should honestly examine ourselves and see what are the movements in us that are truly degrading to the soul. What are the movements that limit us? And the way to judge these is simple. Any moment that makes us unhappy, sad, is wrong. What makes us cheerful and happy is good. These states of being, happiness and unhappiness, sadness or cheerfulness, they are reflections of the reactions of the soul to the movements of the external being. There are what are called dark movements like anger, ill will, jealousy, selfishness, which tie us down and limit our life. The first part of our discipline is what is called purification. A cleansing of our being of this dross. Most of these come from what we may call the lower vital, the desire soul. They should be mercilessly exposed and eliminated. Anger, for instance, is a movement which makes us helpless. It is a movement of unconsciousness. And it not only harms us, but spreads its pernicious vibrations around. And it is very difficult to get rid of anger, because almost always one feels justified in becoming angry. We call it righteous anger. In truth, however, anger is a movement of the ego. When the ego is denied, when its desires are not fulfilled or questioned, it reacts in anger. We should know that there is no such thing as a righteous anger. It is always possible to control a situation by firmness, without excitement. And Mother adds that it is not enough not to give room to anger, but we shall not play into the hands of another's anger. Just refuse to react. And anger dwindles. Similarly, movements of ill will, jealousy, violence, all these are unregenerate movements. Which have to be eschewed. A very important direction from Mother and Sri Aurobindo in this context is while it is right to become aware of our wrong emotions, wrong movements, it is not wise to be always occupied with them, to be always thinking of our defects, always engaged in purifying ourselves, becomes a fruitless exercise beyond a certain stage. We must concentrate on the positive side. As the positive movements are encouraged, built, they automatically displace the negative movements. Patanjali, the author of the aphorisms on yoga, he has a very precious instruction to give. He says, when anything sticks obstinately to you and creates difficulty, you should cultivate the opposite. That neutralizes the offending movement. And builds up a positive force. For instance, if one is prone to anger, one steadily develops forgiveness, understanding, sympathy. If one has a streak of meanness, narrowness, one cultivates generosity, giving. If one has nervousness, fear, one develops courage, trust, strength, and so on. Darkness can go only when we summon light. Light, darkness recedes before the advent of light. Now this discipline of self-purification is called catharsis in the Greek thought, and they provided a means of catharsis in their literature, in their dramas, by making you shed tears of sympathy. Identification with suffering. And taking their example, we should utilize every experience of life to add to our positive moments. I spoke of desire soul. There are actually two souls. The desire soul is the ego and desire complex on the surface of our being. And we are mostly identified with this desire soul. Deep within us, there is the true soul, the psychic being, which is the fount of purity, love, devotion, peace, and joy. But we are mostly lost in the life of the desire soul. Swept by its waves of egoistic, desire fulfilling moments, and our true soul never gets a chance to reach out to the front. Every moment of the desire soul acts as a veil, a cloud covering the psychic being. We are always, that is why we are always tossed between pleasure and pain, extremes of emotion, and do not get our bearings. If we can detach ourselves from this ego soul and try to open communication with the inner soul, inner being, our life begins to change its pattern. the characteristic powers of the soul become articulate in our daily life, and we have the beginnings of peace, brightness, lightness, cheerfulness, purity. But for this to be possible, we should create a climate that is favorable to the emergence of the psychic. All that tends to be chaotic pulls towards unconsciousness, and gives scope to the animal in us vitiates the climate. Movements of selflessness, gentleness, compassion, goodwill, harmony, they dissipate the clouds and invite the soul within to be active. This is a practice that has to be integrated in day-to-day life. And the one common difficulty in this exercise is the forming of depression, mental depression. When we refuse to be a plaything of desires, the vital part in us sulks and refuses to participate in our life. The ego resents interference with its normal claims. And in some form or other, we tend to get depressed. Depression is the enemy of spiritual progress. And each depression, when it comes, seems justified. Mother observes that depression is acute egoism. We are so much concerned about ourselves that any little thing going against our ideas, our wishes, throws us into tantrums. It acts as a black covering over the soul. Incidentally, Mother points out that depressions are harmful for another reason. Every one of us has around our physical body what she calls the nervous envelope. It is what the theosophists call etheric body. Etheric body, E-T-H-E-R-I-C. But what is called in this philosophy the subtle physical body. It is a kind of a wall, a large envelope around our physical body. And nothing from outside can enter into us except through that wall. Now that nervous envelope is as strong as the quality of our life. If we are cheerful, if we are bright, if we are strong in mind, that envelope is strong and it automatically repels most attacks of diseases and the like. But if we are always depressed, always angry, excited, disturbed, particularly depressed, it creates holes in this envelope. And outside attacks get into us very easily. Upsetting our balance of health. It has also been found that a continuous indulgence in depression leads to tuberculosis, because mental depression always leads to a depression of energy in the vital. And after a certain stage, one does not want to come out of the depression. Something in us indulges and enjoys that depression. So even from this point of view, depression is a moment that has to be resisted. When Sri Aurobindo, somebody wrote to Sri Aurobindo once, a disciple practicing this discipline, but the depression is very obstinate, what shall I do? He said, be more obstinate than the depression. I think we can have a break. What we have been speaking till now is really a preparatory work in what Mother calls the austerity of love. She speaks of 4 austerities and 4 liberations. The austerity of knowledge, austerity of love, austerity of power, austerity of beauty. Austerities, self-disciplines to establish those truths in our life. Now, the austerity of love is to arrive at the psychic being, the inner soul in us, which is divine. To build a climate, to prepare the ground, is a preliminary step. To be conscious of our unpsychic qualities, ungodly movements, and take steps to eliminate them from our lifestyle through catharsis up to a certain stage, replacement by positive movements thereafter. Now this is a process that goes on and on. Side by side, simultaneously, we must learn to turn our consciousness inward instead of outward, external orientation. Our mind, our senses, our whole life movement must be turned inwards. That is what is called interiorization of consciousness. Prayer, concentration, meditation, these are some of the means traditionally used to direct our attention inward. Every day we must have some time to live by ourselves for self-contemplation, self-examination, and go within ourselves. This going within is not easily possible unless your lifestyle is geared to that purpose. A deliberate cultivation of a certain quietude in the mind, refusal to be always upset and agitated, tense, that helps. What Mother describes as step back, never react to things without stepping back for a second. Otherwise, you will be only driven. You go on reacting to things instead of responding to things. When you step back, the inner being gets a chance to guide you aright. So this background awareness that the normal life that we lead is not everything. It is only the outermost moment, and the real life, the source of our life, is deep inside. And we should always step back and observe, watch. This gives us a kind of release from external involvement. And by steady practice of exercises like meditation, inward plunge, we open the passage not only for our touching the deeper levels of our consciousness, but also for the emergence of the psychic being or the soul. I am not going to go into details of the various disciplines of meditation. It is not possible within the scheme that we have before us. Suffice it to say that as you succeed in becoming aware of the deeper levels of your consciousness, you have a feeling of detachment, of aloofness, and when the contact with the still deeper levels is made, where the breath of the soul is felt. You experience a deep peace and a certain sensitivity awakes by which you begin to register in your heart and mind the will of the soul, the guidance of the soul. Whenever you are about to do a thing which is not right, you will always feel a kind of a pull or a sinking feeling or something holding back. And you have to respect that feeling at that time. You shall not explain away, justify what you want to do. This psychic intimation always comes as an authentic feeling. Don't ever confuse it with a voice. There are voices and voices. There are many pretenders who claim to be the voice of the soul. There are 100 voices of our own ego, our own unconscious preference, of which we may not be aware. So unless we have undergone perfect purification, it is dangerous to listen to voices. The psychic communicates through a soft intimation. It has a touch of inevitability. And it grows if you make it a habit of listening to it and acting according to it. If you brush it aside as something inconvenient, explaining things, covering up things, it may try once or twice more, but it won't thereafter. It will recede and wait for the right moment again. As this psychic influence grows in your life, there is a formation of love. Love, which is self-giving, self-extending. There is sympathy. In the presence of beauty, in the presence of anything noble, grand, there is a melting feeling. So the psychic has always a melting moment which dissolves our impurities, makes you recover the sense of being a child of the divine. And when the psychic becomes a major factor in your life, and you are entirely guided by it, you become what is called a saint. A saint is one who is rooted in divine love. And he deals with everything in terms of that love. The psychic is offended by insincerity, ugliness, falsehood. Our weaknesses do not matter that much as our insincerities. This realization of the psychic center in us is a capital step in spiritual life. But that is not a culmination. Once that step is done, the next is what is called psychicization. You need to recast your whole nature in terms of the psychic. That is to say, all thoughts, thought movements, all emotions, all life impulses, all physical actions have not only to conform to the character of the psychic, but also express it in life. That is called psychicization. This is establishing the truth of love in our life, and all emotions are only waves, some turbid, some less turbid, of this pure truth of love. Love is a power of creation. It is a power of identification. And it is the content of truth. To arrive at it and establish it in our life, is the third phase or stage of the integral perfection. I think I should stop there now and invite questions. There is one more phase which we will do tomorrow. Yes.
Pandit, I have a question, kind of a carryover from the last class we had also, but it does relate to this too. In terms of not responding to anger or violence, in the sense of if there is no anger or violence within you, then very they happen quite a bit in this country. I don't know about in India, where situations where a person will be walking down the street and will be murdered, or people will be in their homes and a person will break in and steal and kill people, or attack them. These mass murder situations where people seem to be innocent, and it really posed the question of, in a karmic point of view, is there really such a thing as an innocent victim in that
I think so. It need not be any people being just killed like that, It need not be a result of their past karma. It can be the beginning of a karma for that man who is doing that. You follow me? It need not be a result of their karma. They may be perfectly innocent, but he is beginning a new karma. And they are the victims. It is a fact, there can be innocent victims.
I wondered in some way,
It is, you see, it is part of the collective karma that they are undergoing. They are members of a society whose way of life, a society whose state of evolution permits this kind of aberrations. And being member of that society, we pay a certain penalty. That can't be helped. You are staying in America, there is a war, you are conscripted, you are sent to war. It's inevitable. It is participation in the national karma. We are living in the nation. We are taking advantage of the facilities of the nation. We have to pay.
Would that go for something like Saddam being assassinated? Do we also belong to that collective?
Well, he occupies a position, a public position, and a public position has its public side of karma. He takes up certain postures, initiates certain policies, they invite certain reactions, and that is how the polity or the international situations develop. So you can say it is participation in the political karma of the society. If his individual karma is stronger, he would get over it. He would not be dead. It would be like Reagan, where the individual karma is strong. Something happens and you exceed the collective karma. Collective karma is not that binding as individual karma.
Can you do something about the knowledge by identification a little bit more?
Our knowledge is always indirect. Our senses, they go, they see, we hear, we touch, and based on the reports of these senses, we form certain conclusions, and that is our knowledge. They may be our senses, our faculties, may be somebody else's faculties. We take those conclusions on trust. So whether we do it directly or through others, through books, through reports, it is always an indirect knowledge. And an indirect knowledge is always incomplete. Just possible, the perceptions may not have been right. The interpretations may have been defective. The conclusions may be wrong. But as you grow in consciousness, your consciousness learns to enter directly in relation with the consciousness of the object. It sort of envelops that, gets hold of that knowledge, and you immediately know. Just as that there is this pencil here, by my senses, by my hand I know. Now that this is a pencil, that it is there, it is blue, even if I shut my eyes, my consciousness has a way of embracing that pencil, absorbing that consciousness in the pencil and knowing what it contains. All it is a split second instantaneous process, because all consciousness is one. It is housed in different forms. So when I want, immediately my consciousness envelops that, absorbs that, and I know. This is called knowledge by identity, which is the only knowledge that is free from error. And that can come only when our consciousness is fully developed, self-sufficient, and does not have to depend upon its instruments for contact. Knowledge by identity. And it is only by this knowledge by identity that intuition works.
So it's an intuition that's really deeper, more inclusive than
Yes,
that.
yes. Because mind is only a seeker of knowledge, a builder of knowledge, but consciousness at that level possesses that knowledge. And intuition is a ray. It gives you the right knowledge because it comes from knowledge by identity. So in each one of us there is a level where our consciousness knows everything. But we have to work and get to that. It is behind all these layers of existence. It is above the intellect, the thought process.
find yourself in an environment that is less than harmonious, maybe at work or in our home, even though we are not directly involved in the inharmony, what is our role then?
Our role actually is, if we build up in ourselves a certain harmony in our own faculties, in our own members, by the very fact that you are there, it constantly releases force vibrations of harmony in your environment, and it does have an effect. You need not overtly try to impose your harmony on others by advising people or correcting people. But if you are that, refusing to be a part of disharmony, staying put in your formation of harmony, then you become a force for change.
Would you talk a little bit about how modern psychology fits in with the work of Aurobindo and the Mother? It's where it fits in, where it can't fit in, how a person might be able to make use of it, where it isn't the avenue of a teacher right there, but needs something in terms of trying to work on particularly some of the negative aspects of the personality of Philo that are coming up.
As it stands, Western psychology is a science of the mind. Its subject is the mind, mental processes, mental reactions, mental motivation. It is a science of the mind. Actually, psychology has to become a science of consciousness. And consciousness, is not confined to the mind. Mind is only one formulation of consciousness. There are so many layers and levels of consciousness that are to be opened up, that are to be studied. And it should be the proper business of psychology to study that, recognize that there can be and there are areas which are not covered by the mind, which are not analyzable in terms of the mind. That mind is only a limited part of the human being. Aurobindo says, yoga is practical psychology. So everything that happens is a movement of consciousness. And modern psychology, particularly in the West, has exaggerated the role of what they call the subconscious or the unconscious. They have totally lost sight of the superconscious. That there is a large zone which is above the mind, which is now occult. It is slowly being accepted in certain circles, and they are speaking of parapsychology. today they are doing certain things which they would not have done 20 years ago, in admitting certain occult experiences and examining them or studying them. Formerly they would say they are subject to hallucinations, but today they are admitting it. So psychology also is now broadening and enlarging itself. Perhaps it was a phase that was necessary to try to understand the conscious movements of the mind by analyzing unconscious motivations. But the unconscious, there are levels even below the unconscious of which yoga speaks. The inconscient, which refuses to be analyzed. And that there is consciousness involved in the inconscient. Consciousness is struggling to emerge. So all is really one. Now this comprehensive approach and a larger approach admitting the subliminal behind the surface, the superconscient above the conscious mind. I think these are areas where Western psychology has to learn and expand. I would ask our friend Harry to enlighten us if I have not covered any points, or if you feel I am not right or just fair to Western psychology.
Well, the one comment I would have is it seems to me one of the problems with some of what goes on in parapsychology in the Western world is a fascination with occult phenomenon as an end in itself.
I see.
And without relating it
I see.
to a larger concept.
As possible areas of a larger mind, they won't do that.
This isn't true everywhere. This
Uh-huh.
isn't true everywhere. But it seems to me a lot of the statistical experiment that goes on
Uh-huh.
has this kind of quality to it.
Uh-huh.
And then
Mm.
you see, I think when you speak about the inconscient below the unconscious,
Yes.
I wonder if this isn't related. I think there are certainly points of view within Western psychology that there is an area of the unconscious that always is unconscious.
Uh-huh.
By its
I
very
see.
nature, the
Uh-huh.
unconscious cannot always be analyzed, and that it is that struggle
Must be.
upward through the layers.
It must be that inconscient too.
So it seems
Yes.
to me that's the layer that you're referring to
Yes.
as the inconscient.
I see. Yes, because the unconscious can be made conscious by increasing the content of consciousness, but the inconscient can't.
There's still that
Yes,
layer
yes,
that will always be unconscious.
yes.
And it's somehow that upward struggle.
It is admitted, is it?
I think so.
Uh-huh.
In the Jungian approaches, I think in Carl Jung's,
Mm.
some of his writings about the unconscious, he makes the view that there's something that cannot, mystery there, something that cannot be completely transformed.
Uh-huh. And what is meant by collective unconscious?
Well, I think if it is, I would guess that there might be something in that global term, collective unconscious,
Mhm.
that might include something of the unconscious.
I see.
I think one area where I think Jung is the closest perhaps, where he includes something of the self or something deeper than the mind. And yet, I think even there, I read something recently where someone, a disciple of Jung in London,
Uh-huh.
had mentioned Sri Aurobindo, the last page of his book, and it was on forgetting and memory, the very small talks
Uh-huh.
that advocate. And he said that as much as a disciple as he was of Carl Jung, and very much aware of his discoveries, that he felt that Sri Aurobindo's awareness of something in the unconscious that was conscious without the ego and so on was something we had to learn from these.
Uh-huh.
But this is related to the whole concept of the self, don't you think, Mary Jo? About something larger than the ego.
Yes.
I mean, it seems to me that Jung uses the word self in a somewhat different way than you're using it.
I see. We use the word self as something, which is aloof, which is a witness, which supports but does not participate in the life movement. But obviously he uses the self in the sense of soul.
Why then? What would you say?
Well, this is something I'm puzzling very
Yes,
much about
yes,
and being
I
so
know.
interested in. It seems to me that the self, as Jung defines it, is closest to what I've heard you say about soul. But I also think you see that in Indian thinking, because it's not a psychology and because it is a spiritual system, that the concept of what's globally included in what Jung calls the self may be what's differentiated in Sri Aurobindo's thought. Because if you read through the writings, it's as if he comes to a certain point and says, I can't go any further because I'm a man of science and I am a psychologist and a medical man. But then you always have the feeling that he experiences more than he will put in his
I see.
in his structure, in his theoretical structure. But you see, I think it's there too, and I think that's one of the places, for me at least, in the West, where I've been able to get in touch again with things in the Eastern tradition that have always interested me, but I couldn't find a bridge for them from my culture, and that psychological point of view has helped me to do some of that. That was such an interesting question that you asked, because it's what I've been wanting to hear.
One of the things I just wanted to add is kind of my own personal experience in working with a therapist involved in the Jungian approach for 3 years. And just a very interesting process of, for instance, working with things like anger, fear, and really digging deep and even working with dreams and whatnot about the roots of the angers and fears, and just really studying them and understanding them and saying, oh, it's coming from this, oh, that makes sense, and the whole unraveling process, and realizing though, after 3 years, still waking up one morning and feeling anger and saying, oh, wait a minute, now I understand where it all comes from, but you still have to get down to the practical point of, well, what do I do about anger now? Period. I mean, it's like you can analyze it, and find a reason for your anger forever, it seems. And then, it's like one morning, wait a minute, what is anger? And what can I do to start, stopping this thing, this anger, whatever it is? And at that point, I pretty much kind of stopped working with my therapist and started, doing more research, I know, with the Aurobindo books, and starting to look at the root of what is anger, where does it come from, and how to start working with that reaction to things.
There's a terrifying statement by Jung in one of his very early books. He says every morning we recreate a new neurosis.
Uh-huh.
And it seems to me that's,
You know, at some
yes.
point, you have to start taking the practical,
You have to start taking it seriously.
taking it seriously and saying, you know, wait a minute, you know, if I really truly want to change something here, I'm going to have to work at another kind of focus or something. And the yoga became something practical in that way.
I guess I think for me, one of the most difficult things to learn in my own work was that insight didn't make a change, and that's when the work begins. You know that. But again, this is something that I've been so much interested in. You see, because in your descriptions, it's as if the thing is to put aside the dark passions, to depotentiate them, to put something positive in its place. And what I'm going to be working on for, I think, a long time is that for me, I had to understand something about them before I could put them aside. And I don't know if this is a difference in my personality, you know, or whether it's a difference in cultural perceptions. Because for a number of years as a young woman, I was so interested in meditation and it was not Sri Aurobindo, I didn't know about this, but in the trying to put aside, for me that didn't work. I had to do some understanding, and then I could begin to move a little away.
I think that's natural. I mean, even in terms of studying Sri Aurobindo and Mother, they had to have a sense of knowing, a sense of understanding to be able to say what they've said. I mean, you can't just say something you have no experience or connection with. It has to connect on some level. And I imagine you have to work on the level that you can connect with at that point while you're going to the next level. You can't just jump from one point all of a sudden to the super mental. I mean, you have to go into the different stages. The idea, of course, is hopefully not to dwell any longer than you need to in any one stage. Take the understanding that you have and then move on to the next stage. And I see one of the problems perhaps with certain aspects of psychology is that many times it dwells on just the mental stage and keep rehashing and rehashing and rehashing and never allows it to go on to the next stage.
Yes, and you see, I think that is an absolutely valid point of the people getting stuck, as we were saying, repeating and repeating and repeating something.
There is a point of view, you know, that when you are in a thing, you can't really know it. When you are in an experience, you can't really know it. You have experience of it. But unless you rise above or are detached, you can't know it. You can really understand an experience only when the experience is over and you stand outside that experience. Similarly, a thing like anger, a thing like violence, when you are in it, you can't really know it. You have to be outside, and then you can judge it for what it is. The experience of it gives a basis, no doubt. But to be always stationed in that, I think it doesn't give a foothold, you know, to understand what it is. You can't understand anger only in itself. Anger is a product of various other factors. Motivations are different, origins are different. Now from where does it come? Yes.
Would you say the same thing about love also? And let me say what I mean. Because it seems to me one of the traps we all fall into is that what we may like to believe is a loving response, first of all, may have motivations of ego in it, for one thing. And the other thing is that to have a loving response to another person may not necessarily mean letting them do what they want to do.
Certainly not.
So, well,
Certainly
I'm
not.
interested in your
Certainly not. And
How do we know?
real love, a real moment of love, does not care for response. It flows without calculation, without expectation. Whether there is a response or not, it shouldn't make difference for it. It may withhold itself if it is not, wanted, or if the other person is not ready, it stays. But I think expectation of a response cannot form part of a moment of real love.
Would you say also that we need to be outside of the experience in order to evaluate our
Yes,
purity?
yes.
Our purity at the moment.
Yes. I think we have to stop. I have another class within an hour. We'll continue.